What happened when an undercover CEO stumbled upon a small boy scavenging scraps at his aging theater, only to uncover a heartbreaking family secret he thought was lost forever? Welcome, wonderful listeners. You have a rare gift: the heart to see beyond the surface and the soul to appreciate the quiet battles people fight every day. Today's story is about second chances, pride, forgiveness, and the incredible power of family to heal old wounds. Get comfortable, settle in. You're about to experience a journey filled with hope, courage, and the kind of love that refuses to give up. The Rosewood Playhouse wasn't much to look at anymore. The red velvet curtains were faded, the stage lights flickered if you didn't tap the side panel just right, and the marquee out front had long since surrendered a few letters to time and storms. Yet for Ben Carter, this crumbling building was sacred ground. Years ago, before Broadway stages and big city dreams had carried him away, it had been his parents' pride, a place where laughter, music, and hope lived between every creaky floorboard. Now at 57, Ben returned, not as a star, but as a quiet caretaker, sweeping aisles and fixing props under the cover of night. Most folks in town didn't even know he owned the place. They thought he was just another old volunteer hanging on to yesterday, and maybe, in a way, he was. As he wiped down the dusty railings one evening after a slow rehearsal, Ben caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. Near the backstage door, a small figure crept inside, a boy, thin and nimble, slipping through the dark like he belonged to it. Ben froze, heart quickening not with fear, but with something more complicated. The boy wasn't stealing, wasn't wrecking anything. Instead, he moved with delicate care, gathering discarded concession food, a half-full bottle of water, a scrap of costume fabric. And before he disappeared again, he left something behind, a handmade ticket crafted from torn playbills, folded with neat, tiny hands. Ben stooped to pick it up. Feeling the weight of the gesture, it was a gift, a silent thank you. As he stood alone on the darkened stage, the old boards groaning under his boots, Ben realized that maybe, just maybe, the Playhouse's best story hadn't been told yet. Maybe the final curtain hadn't fallen, not if there were still small hands crafting dreams from scraps, not if there was still someone left who believed. Over the next several nights, Ben found himself lingering at the Playhouse longer than usual, hidden behind dusty curtains or crouched near the concession stand, waiting. Like clockwork, the boy returned, slipping through the side door with quiet precision. He never made a mess, never took more than a few items: a bruised apple left behind by a cast member, a packet of crackers, a scrap of costume fabric discarded after fittings, and always, he left something in return, a tiny token of gratitude. A paper rose folded from old scripts, a ticket stub transformed into a miniature fan, a ribbon tied carefully into a loop and placed where Ben would find it. Ben began leaving small offerings of his own: a sandwich wrapped neatly in wax paper, a bottle of apple juice tucked behind the concessions counter, a clean sweatshirt draped casually over a chair. The boy accepted them with the same quiet dignity, never lingering, never letting himself be seen too long. Ben marveled at the boy's pride, the way he never begged, never rummaged through trash like some desperate scavenger. There was purpose in every step, an invisible code of honor in how he moved through the worn theater halls. It stirred something deep in Ben's chest, something he hadn't felt in years, a fierce need to protect, to understand. He found himself thinking of his sister Amelia and the stubborn streak that ran in the Carter bloodline. Was that same fierce pride reflected in this boy? Some nights Ben would catch himself sitting on the stage steps after locking up, the cool night air brushing through the broken window panes, wondering who the boy was, where he came from, and what kind of world could shape such careful, silent gratitude. The Playhouse had been a sanctuary once, for dreamers, misfits, and anyone who needed to believe in a little magic. Maybe it still could be. Maybe the boy, with his fragile gifts and solemn eyes, was a reminder that even when the seats were empty and the lights flickered, some dreams refused to die. They just waited, quietly, for someone to notice. Ben sat alone one evening in the front row of the darkened playhouse, the boy's latest token, a tiny folded paper star resting in his calloused hands. The theater smelled of old wood, sawdust, and the faint scent of forgotten performances. He stared at the stage where countless actors had once poured their hearts out, wondering how a place built for grand dreams had become a refuge for a boy who moved like a ghost. Night after night, Ben had watched silently, convincing himself that small kindnesses, a sandwich, a sweater, were enough, but not interfering was somehow respectful. But deep down, a voice he hadn't listened to in years grew louder. Do more. On that night, as the clock inched toward 9, Ben made up his mind. When the boy came again, Ben wouldn't just leave something behind. He would follow, not to confront, not to scare, but to understand. He pulled a battered hoodie over his head, shoved his work gloves in his pocket, and slipped out the side door, into the cold night air. When the boy appeared, clutching the latest food bundle Ben had left, Ben kept to the shadows, moving slowly, carefully, a few paces behind. The boy's limp was more noticeable tonight, a slight hitch in his step that made Ben's gut twist. Whoever he was, wherever he was going, he wasn't just surviving. He was carrying something heavier than hunger. The streets grew rougher as they moved away from the quaint downtown into cracked sidewalks and dim alleys. Ben tightened his grip on the straps of his old satchel, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the chase. He wasn't sure what he would find at the end of this silent trail, but something told him it would matter more than anything he had built inside these old walls. The playhouse could wait. Dreams could wait. Right now, a boy with careful hands and proud shoulders was walking alone into the night, and Ben Carter wasn't going to let him disappear without knowing why. The boy's path ended at a battered brick building tucked between an abandoned laundromat and a boarded-up corner store, the West Side Women's Shelter. Ben hung back in the shadows across the street, his breath misting in the cold air. A worn sign over the entrance flapped in the breeze, and yellowed security lights buzzed overhead. As the boy punched in a code at the side entrance and disappeared inside, Ben's heart sank. He had imagined possibilities, maybe a rundown apartment, a crowded foster home, but not this, a shelter. Ben was debating what to do next when the shelter door creaked open again and a woman in nursing scrubs stepped out, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. She was middle-aged, tired-looking but kind-eyed, someone who had seen too much hardship and stayed anyway. Ben approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance. "Excuse me," he called softly, hands raised slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "I'm looking for someone. A small boy, maybe 8 or 9, red hoodie, limp." The nurse narrowed her eyes, sizing him up. "Family?" she asked sharply. Ben hesitated, then said the first truth that came to mind. I think he might be my nephew." The nurse frowned. "Lucas," Ben guessed, the name feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. A long pause. The nurse flicked ash onto the cracked sidewalk, studying him. Finally, she spoke. "Lucas Carter. His mother's Amelia." The world tilted under Ben's feet. Amelia, his sister, the sister he hadn't spoken to in a decade. His mind reeled, flashes of fights after their parents' deaths, accusations hurled like knives, doors slammed so hard they never reopened. And all this time, while he rebuilt a crumbling theater 2 miles away, his sister and her son had been struggling to survive within reach. "Is she—" Ben cleared his throat, trying to force air into his lungs. "Is she all right?" The nurse's expression softened slightly. "She's holding on, but it's been tough. Chronic illness. Work's dried up. Pride kept her from asking for help sooner." Pride. The old family curse. Ben felt a shame pool in his gut. "Can I see them?" he asked, voice hoarse. The nurse hesitated, then said, "Come back during visiting hours tomorrow. If Amelia wants to see you, that's her choice." She stubbed out her cigarette and slipped back inside, leaving Ben alone under the flickering streetlight, clutching 1,000 regrets and a paper star that suddenly felt heavier than lead. The next afternoon, Ben stood in the cramped visitor's room of the shelter, his hands stuffed awkwardly into the pockets of his jacket. The walls were covered in children's crayon drawings. families holding hands, colorful houses with smoking chimneys, painful reminders of what he had lost. Every few seconds, Ben glanced toward the door, half hoping and half dreading that Amelia would walk through it. Instead, it was Lucas who appeared first, a small backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide with a mixture of recognition and suspicion. "You're the janitor from the theater," the boy said, tilting his head. Ben smiled weakly. "Not just the janitor," he admitted. "I'm family." Lucas's brows knitted together, uncertainty flashing across his face, but before either of them could speak again, a soft, hoarse voice floated in from the hallway. "Lucas, who are you talking to?" And then she was there. Amelia. She was thinner than Ben remembered, her once vibrant auburn hair streaked heavily with gray, her eyes, so much like their mother's, widened as she took him in. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with 10 years of unspoken words. Then Amelia's face hardened. "What are you doing here?" Her tone was flat, but Ben could hear the tremor underneath it. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. "I saw Lucas. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know anything." Amelia crossed her arms, shielding herself. "And now you do." "What? You want to feel better about yourself? Bring a casserole? Write a check?" The bitterness in her voice stung more than any slap. Ben shook his head, swallowing hard. "No, I want to fix what I broke." Amelia's lips tightened, as if holding back 1,000 sharp retorts. Then her gaze shifted to Lucas, who was watching them both with an expression far too old for his years. The tension cracked slightly. "We're not your charity case, Ben," she said finally, her voice softer but still edged with hurt. "I know," he said quietly. "I just want a chance to be your brother again." For a long moment, Amelia said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to drain the fight from her, she said, Maybe we can talk later." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was a beginning. They met again 2 days later, this time in the small courtyard behind the shelter, where a few worn benches sat under a crooked maple tree. Amelia was wrapped in an oversized sweater, her thin frame barely filling the seat. Lucas sat close by, fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie, stealing glances at Ben. The air between them was fragile, held together by tentative threads of civility and old memories neither dared tug on too hard. Ben cleared his throat, feeling the weight of what he was about to offer pressing against his ribs. "I have an apartment," he began, voice low and careful. "Above the playhouse. It's not fancy, a little beat up, honestly, but it's clean, safe. It's yours if you want it." Amelia stiffened immediately, her walls rising. "We don't need charity," she said, the familiar Carter pride flaring in her eyes. Ben shook his head. "It's not charity, Amelia. It's family. It's what Mom and Dad would have wanted." She looked away, her hands tightening into fists on her lap. Ben pressed on, choosing his words like stepping stones across a river. "You're barely getting by here, Lucas." He glanced at the boy, who was now pretending not to listen, but whose every muscle was taut with hope. "He deserves better. A place to stretch out. Home." For a long moment, Amelia said nothing. Then, without looking at Ben, she murmured, "What's the catch?" Ben smiled sadly. "No catch. No rent. No conditions. Just let me be there. Let me be your brother again." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. Finally, Lucas spoke up, his voice small but firm. "Mom, can we? Please?" Amelia closed her eyes, fighting an internal battle Ben could practically feel vibrating in the air. When she opened them again, her defenses were cracked, but not shattered. "We'll come see it," she said, her voice rough. "No promises." Ben exhaled slowly, feeling a fragile sense of relief settle into his bones. It wasn't victory, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door cracked open, waiting for them to step through. And Ben would be there, on the other side, ready. The apartment above the playhouse was no palace, but to Amelia and Lucas, it might as well have been a castle. The first time they climbed the narrow, creaky staircase, Amelia moved slowly, leaning against the wall, her body still fragile from years of illness and strain. Lucas, however, darted ahead, his small sneakers thumping eagerly on the worn wooden steps. Ben followed behind, heart hammering in his chest, hoping they would see what he saw, not the peeling paint or the stubborn windows, but the chance for something new. Inside, the space smelled faintly of old varnish and forgotten sunlight. Dust motes floated in the golden light streaming through crooked windows. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a cozy living room, modest, but enough. Lucas immediately laid claim to the smaller room, chattering about how he could build a fort with blankets and maybe even put a poster of outer space on the wall. Amelia wandered into the kitchen, her hand trailing along the counter, her eyes distant. Ben gave her space, busying himself by opening windows and letting the fresh air rush in, sweeping out the years of solitude. Over the next few days, they set about making it livable. Ben patched the worst of the wall cracks while Lucas, with great seriousness, picked out second-hand curtains at the thrift store nearby. Amelia, still conserving her energy, sat at the kitchen table directing operations, her dry wit slowly re-emerging. "If you're going to climb ladders," she quipped at Ben one afternoon, "at least try not to break a hip." They laughed, a real laugh, rusty but genuine, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the years hadn't stolen so much after all. Slowly, a rhythm began to form. Mornings of coffee and homework, afternoons fixing stage props together, evenings spent in the Playhouse's empty auditorium, where Lucas would run down the aisles pretending he was a great explorer on a grand adventure. Some nights, Amelia would sit in the old costume room, running her fingers over bolts of fabric, whispering design ideas under her breath. Watching them, Ben felt something unexpected blooming in his chest. Not just responsibility or guilt, but pride, hope. The apartment wasn't just a place to sleep anymore, it was becoming a home. And the Playhouse, once only a relic of old dreams, began to hum quietly with the stirrings of new life. As the weeks passed, the Playhouse slowly transformed from a tired relic into a place alive with energy and quiet magic again, and so did the small family living above it. Amelia, armed with her sewing skills and a stubborn streak that hadn't faded with time, found her way back to costume design. She started small, mending old outfits left in the wardrobe department, but before long she was sketching new designs late into the night, her spirit reigniting one careful stitch at a time. Ben gave her free rein, clearing space backstage and setting up a proper sewing corner. The actors, once used to tattered costumes and loose hems, marveled at the sudden upgrade. Lucas, meanwhile, blossomed under the Playhouse lights. Shy at first, he would sit quietly at rehearsals, watching the other children rehearse lines and stumble through dance steps. One afternoon, after some gentle nudging from Ben and a bit of bribery involving extra ice cream, Lucas agreed to audition for the children's theater production of Peter Pan. To everyone's surprise and his own, he landed a small speaking role as one of the Lost Boys. The change in him was immediate and profound. Confidence grew with every rehearsal, his limp barely noticeable as he bounded across the stage, laughter echoing through the rafters. The Playhouse regulars, many of whom had known Ben for decades, welcomed Lucas and Amelia without hesitation, wrapping them into the quirky, stubborn family that kept the old theater alive. Saturday evenings became special. Ben, Amelia, and Lucas would sit in the front row, watching the grown-up cast rehearse or simply sharing quiet dinners under the ghost light that never went out between shows. The stage that had once been a hollow monument to Ben's regrets now throbbed with hope, love, and second chances. It wasn't just about saving a building anymore. It was about saving each other. Together, they were breathing life back into both the theater and themselves. A family stitched together again, stronger at the broken places. Just when it seemed like life had finally stitched itself back into something whole, the seams began to fray again. One chilly afternoon during rehearsal, Ben noticed Amelia moving slower than usual, her face pale and tight with pain. She waved off his concern with a forced smile, brushing it off as just a bad day, but Ben could see the truth in the tremble of her hands and the exhaustion clouding her eyes. By the next morning, she couldn't get out of bed. Her illness, kept at bay for weeks by sheer determination and stubborn pride, had flared back with brutal force. Lucas sat by her bedside, clutching a worn copy of Peter Pan as if willing her to fly free from her broken body. Ben watched helplessly, a pit forming in his gut, realizing that no matter how much they had rebuilt, it could all be torn away again, and soon. The shelter nurse, Taylor, who had become something of a family friend, visited and confirmed Ben's worst fears. Amelia needed more aggressive treatment, more than they could handle in a tiny apartment above an old theater. She'll need home health care, Taylor said gently. Maybe even long-term hospitalization if it worsens. Lucas overheard every word, his small shoulders stiffening with fear. Later that night, Ben found the boy sitting alone on the stage, legs swinging off the edge, staring into the darkened auditorium. "I don't want to lose her," Lucas said simply, his voice breaking the way only a child's voice can when carrying too much. Ben sat beside him, unable to find comforting words, because truthfully, he was just as scared. He had promised them a new beginning, but now it felt like he was standing helplessly in the wings again, watching everything slip away before the second act could even begin. In that heavy silence, one thing became clear to Ben. He could no longer stand apart, offering help from a safe distance. If he truly meant to call himself their family, he had to step fully into it, no matter how messy, hard, or heartbreaking the road ahead might be. The next morning, before the playhouse doors opened for rehearsals, Ben sat alone in the front row, a battered manila folder in his lap. Inside were the guardianship papers he had quietly begun preparing the night before, after Lucas's words had echoed through the empty auditorium like a vow he couldn't ignore. If Amelia's health worsened, and deep down they all knew it might, Lucas couldn't be left adrift again. Ben wasn't just offering a home now, he was offering his life. When Amelia felt strong enough to sit up, Ben brought the folder to her bedside, heart pounding harder than it ever had before a Broadway opening night. She studied him through tired, skeptical eyes as he explained. Guardianship papers, medical support arrangements, long-term care options. "I'm not giving up on you, Amelia," he said quietly. "But no matter what happens, Lucas will never be alone. I promise you that." For a long moment, Amelia said nothing. She clutched the quilt tighter around her frail body, pride and fear warring in her hollowed face. Then, with a rasp that barely rose above a whisper, she said, "You're serious about this?" "More serious than anything in my life," Ben answered, voice thick with emotion. "Family isn't a burden. It's the best thing I ever lost." A shaky breath escaped her lips, half sob, half laugh, and she reached for the pen Ben placed gently in her hand. As she signed her name, a tear slipped down her cheek, mirrored by one sliding down Ben's own. Lucas, peeking around the doorframe, broke into a wide, relieved smile that lit up the room brighter than the playhouse's ghost light ever had. In that moment, it wasn't about theaters or second chances or even old wounds anymore. It was about a promise, raw, human, unbreakable, a promise made not under spotlights or grand stages, but in the quiet bravery of two broken siblings, choosing to fight for each other, no matter what curtain might fall next. 6 months later, the apartment above the playhouse no longer felt like a halfway point between broken pasts. It felt like home. The once empty walls now bloomed with life. Lucas's school art projects hung proudly in the hallway. Amelia's costume sketches cluttered the kitchen table and framed photographs, old ones of their parents, new ones of the three of them, filled the gaps in between. Mornings were filled with the smell of coffee and the clatter of Lucas rushing to gather his backpack, while evenings were marked by the soft hum of sewing machines or the distant laughter of rehearsals echoing up from the stage below. Amelia had gained strength steadily, her illness no longer the shadow it once was, though she still moved carefully, conserving her energy for what mattered most. She had even taken over managing the Playhouse's costume department officially, her designs now gracing every show, vibrant and full of the spirit that once seemed lost forever. Lucas had found his stride too, not just on the stage but in the world, making friends at school, dreaming about writing his own plays someday. And Ben, for the first time in decades, felt a quiet sense of purpose settle in his bones. It wasn't the flashy Broadway life he once imagined, it was better. Real, grounded, filled with late-night talks, burnt grilled cheeses, and the warm weight of belonging. The Playhouse thrived along with them. Saturday shows drew in crowds eager for the old magic reborn. Locals started calling it the Heart of Rosewood. Again, not for the building's architecture or history, but because of the people who had poured their lives into it. And at the center of it all was a man who once thought he had lost everything. Now, surrounded by more family, more laughter, and more love than he ever believed he deserved. On a crisp Saturday evening, the Playhouse was alive with energy. Every seat was filled, the air buzzing with the chatter of proud parents, loyal locals, and longtime theater-goers. The children's production of Peter Pan was about to begin, and behind the velvet curtain, Lucas stood in costume, his patched-up tunic straightened carefully by Amelia just minutes before. From his seat in the front row, Ben watched, heart swelling with a mixture of pride and wonder. This wasn't just another play, it was a celebration, a living, breathing testament to everything they had fought to rebuild. As the curtain rose and Lucas bounded onto the stage, delivering his lines with clear confidence and a wide smile, Ben felt the audience lean in, drawn to the boy's energy and the magic that filled the old theater once more. Beside him, Amelia sat with her hands clasped tightly, tears shining in her eyes. She wasn't frail tonight, she was radiant, bathed in the glow of a second chance fully embraced. When the final bow came and Lucas stepped forward, taking his place in the center of the cheering cast, he scanned the crowd and found them immediately, his mother and his uncle beaming with pride. With a grin, he raised his hand in a grand dramatic gesture. "To family!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the applause. The audience, not knowing the depth of the moment, clapped and laughed warmly, but Ben and Amelia heard the truth behind it. It wasn't just a line. It was a victory, a promise, a new beginning. After the show, they gathered at their usual spot, a battered table backstage, surrounded by pizza boxes, costume scraps, and the easy chaos of a family that had survived the storm. Ben looked around the table, at Amelia's tired but glowing face, at Lucas's animated retelling of backstage mishaps, and felt something settle deep in his chest. A piece he hadn't known he was missing. The Playhouse's best story hadn't been written under bright lights or recorded in old reviews. It was happening right here, in the quiet after the curtain fell, where dreams dared to bloom again. And for the first time in a long, long time, Ben knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Sometimes the dreams we chase aren't the ones that save us, it's the people we almost lose along the way. Through Ben's journey, we learn that pride and silence can steal more from us than any failure ever could. He thought preserving the Playhouse's legacy meant staying loyal to the past. But true legacy is built through living connections, not memories frozen in time. By opening his heart to Amelia and Lucas, Ben discovered that healing broken family bonds requires courage, the kind that shows up not with grand gestures, but with steady, everyday love. It's never too late to forgive, to rebuild, and to become the person someone else can lean on. Life doesn't give encores for our regrets, but it does offer second chances if we're brave enough to take the stage again. In the quiet spaces between old hurts and new hopes, family, real family, is found not by blood alone, but by choosing each other over and over. And sometimes the most beautiful redemption stories aren't the ones shouted from the spotlight. They're the ones whispered backstage, where dreams dare to grow again.